Hello, welcome to Project Save the World. I'm Robbie Tulip, and I'm really pleased to have Glenn Weinreb with me. Glenn has done a whole lot of research on stratospheric aerosol injection as a method to cool the Earth, and it's a great pleasure to have him join me here for this discussion for Project Save the World. I must say, it was good to hear news that Meta Spencer, the convener of Project Save the World, is on the mend. She's been unwell, and we look forward to Meta joining us again. So, to introduce Glenn, let me see. Glenn is a graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, as I understand, as an engineer, and he did a whole lot of work on Glenn Weinreb instruments and on computer hardware. But over the last decade or so, he's had this focus on how to actually solve climate change, and he set up this Manhattan 2 project named after the original Manhattan Project. So, warm welcome, Glenn, and I'll hand over to you to just say a few words to introduce yourself, if you could.
Oh, sorry. Sure. So, I started in the 1980s, as an undergraduate student, and I developed some hardware and software products that are used to automate research laboratories and factories, and started selling them as a student. And so I was able to start a company while in school, and I ran that company for 35 years. And then I did a career change. This was 6 years ago. And one night I was lying in bed and staring at the ceiling thinking, I'm tired of chasing money as an entrepreneur, and I don't even care about money. I don't like to shop. I don't need anything. If I go to a mall and someone says, I'll buy you something, I'm like, I don't want anything. I already have a phone. I've got shoes. I don't need anything. And so here I am chasing money, but I don't even care about money. And so I was thinking, what should I do with my life? And I like puzzles and challenges. And so what I did is I said to myself, why don't you tackle the climate problem? And my view was that the climate problem was not being handled, meaning it wasn't being addressed by our society. And then the question is, well, what do you do about that? And I helped set up thousands of research laboratories and factories over 35 years since my products were used by them. And so I was familiar with R&D and how also decisions are made regarding industry, since I've been involved heavily in industry for 35 years. And also I've sold products to the oil industry. So I have an understanding of sort of how that works. And so I started a nonprofit with some friends of mine to tackle the climate problem, and focus on the following question. Is it possible to solve the climate problem with a surge in research and development in key areas? And if so, what are those areas, and how much might that cost? And so that's a question. And it's complicated because there's a lot of different things that could potentially be developed. And also the climate problem costs are in the trillions of dollars, and this justifies spending billions to save trillions. So then you could add, what can be developed that's not being developed that costs billions of dollars that can save trillions in climate-related costs. And so since I was involved in setting up R&D laboratories and factories, I was familiar with costs of R&D and also cost structure. If you're doing manufacturing and you're trying to achieve a certain objective, had an idea of what kind of things can be done for that. And so I was thinking I could take my experience and then apply it to climate change. And so I've published 50 articles in magazines like EE Times, Electronic Design News, Power Electronics, and I've published 35 videos. And I've been recently working with AI to help with billion-dollar sized R&D proposals, which is quite amazing, where you can ask the AI, given $1 billion or so to spend over 5 years, write a proposal for how to do something, and the AI does a pretty good job with it. So the last couple of weeks, I've been working on that.
So, Glenn, your proposal with the Manhattan 2 project focuses on the research and development of stratospheric aerosol injection as a method to cool the Earth, and that's been immensely controversial. What's your sense of how this sort of cooling technology compares to decarbonisation as a climate policy strategy?
So if you have, let's say, a global climate model, which is software that calculates what is expected to happen in the future to the planet. But if you do have a global climate model and it's accurate, and we don't have a global climate model that is accurate, but if we did have one that was accurate, then we can apply the three tools in the toolbox, so to speak. Decarbonization, there's removing carbon dioxide from atmosphere, which is sometimes referred to as CDR, or carbon dioxide removal, or sometimes that's referred to as direct air capture. And then the third tool in the toolbox is reflecting sunlight back into outer space. So there's three basic methods: the decarbonization, there's removing carbon dioxide from atmosphere, and reflecting sunlight. And with reflecting sunlight, you have two methods. That seem promising. One is stratospheric aerosol injection, and the other is marine cloud brightening. And then with each method, you can, in theory, if you have an accurate global climate model, then you could specify how much of these three are done, let's say, going forward, and then an accurate global climate model would tell you what's going to happen to the planet, in theory. But one of the problems is we don't have an accurate global climate model, and we know our GCMs are not accurate because they do not predict what we observe. So we observe the average global temperature, we observe a global temperature warming rate, and we observe other parameters, and the GCMs did not predict these. So you could start with the issue that our GCMs, global climate models, are not accurate, and then you can ask, the next step is to ask the AI, what is a list of experiments that we can do to improve the accuracy of global climate models? And given it could be $1 billion over 5 years. And that is something that I've done, and I have a document that summarizes the response. And so that's, I would say, step one is to improve the accuracy of the global climate models. And there's two areas that we're having trouble with. One is we don't understand clouds, and then the other area is we don't understand how much sunlight reflects off of air pollution. So then you can ask the AI, well, what are experiments that would enable us to measure how much sunlight reflects off of air pollution? And the AI has a response to that. And also there's the question for AI, what are experiments we can do to improve our understanding of clouds? And AI has an explanation for that. So that's one of the things we can do. And then the other thing is, if we have, let's say, stratospheric aerosol injection or marine cloud brightening, which is techniques for reflecting sunlight back into outer space, the next step is, what is a plan? Let's say an SAI or MCB, that is stratospheric aerosol injection or marine cloud brightening plan, given where we are today, and let's say 15 years from now, we're at full-scale operations. And if we have a plan for moving from today up to full scale in 15 years, then the question is, what does that plan look like? And I think a plan would have three phases. Phase one is R&D, phase two is experimental operations, and then phase three is construction.
But so, Glenn, if I can jump in, one of the problems is that within the climate action movement, the dominant view is that the most important thing is to stop using fossil fuels, and that's I think the sort of assumption that a lot of the audience of this podcast would be much more familiar with. But so you seem to be just assuming that's not practical. What's your why would we need to move to solar geoengineering technologies if just shutting down fossil fuels would be a satisfactory response to climate change? I mean, I know we've had the Paris Accord, which hasn't been particularly successful in decarbonising the economy. But what's your view on that whole area?
Right. So there's two, let's say, problems with decarbonization. Let's say one is if I reduce my own personal carbon dioxide, I don't benefit. That is, if I reduce, let's say I'm 1 part per 8 billion, I'm one person out of 8 billion people on the planet. And if I reduce my carbon dioxide, and let's say I reduce the average global temperature by a trillionth of a degree, then I'm not going to benefit. So I'm not inclined to spend my money to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. In other words, I'm not inclined to pay more money for green products, that is, products that reduce carbon dioxide.
So that
And
free rider problem escalates even to the national level. Like I'm here in Australia, we have a debate. Why should we bother about cutting our emissions in Australia when China, for example, is emitting so much more?
right. So it's in everybody's best financial interest to put on a show of some kind and encourage others to act. I mean, that's kind of if it's there. There's an interesting sort of way of looking at this. There's the climate activists, let's say, view that carbon dioxide emissions is bad and we need to reduce, and we need to get people to understand there's a climate problem, and then they'll reduce their carbon dioxide. That's one view. The other view is the economists that'll say, oh, that's not how consumer behavior works, and we observe consumer behavior, so we know how it works, and this is not what we observe. And we observe that people act in their best financial interest. And so this whole thing about reducing at large scales, at the scales needed, does not occur. And also you can look at the carbon dioxide emissions and how it changes over time, and it goes up 1 to 2% per year. And the economists would say, well, that's what we would expect, because there are some cases where the green option costs less, and that moves forward naturally. And then you have GDP growth of 3% per year. So that pushes carbon dioxide emissions up by 3%. And then you have some things that push it down by about 1.5. And then the result that we observe is average carbon dioxide emissions increase about 1.5% per year. This is the observed data. And so so that's one problem, is no one wants to pay more money. Not everybody, but most people at large scales are not inclined to pay more money for green products. And the second problem, that's problem number one. The second problem is that there's this idea that carbon dioxide emissions cause global warming, therefore we should reduce our carbon dioxide emissions to solve the global warming problem. That's kind of been the sort of the mantra of the whole climate movement last 30 years. However, unfortunately, that is only slightly correct. And the reason for that is we get into the question of what causes global warming. And in climate science, there's these things called radiative forcings, which is another way of saying it's a source of warming. And we have 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide that have been emitted into the atmosphere over the last 150 years.
Or 2.5 trillion tons is the figure I've heard.
Oh, well, okay. I think some of it has fallen out.
That's right. Yeah.
So we put in 1.5 trillion. Some of it comes out. I think right now, the carbon dioxide in atmosphere relative to 150 years ago, it's like 1,100 tons.
That's right. It's still up there. Yeah.
Or 1.1 trillion or so. So you have this excess carbon dioxide in atmosphere relative to 150 years ago, and then sunlight passes through that and hits the Earth, and then the Earth emits heat radiation back out towards space, and that gets absorbed by this excess carbon dioxide in atmosphere, and that causes warming. So that's a warming source. So it's 150 years of past emissions, not necessarily future emissions, although future emissions add to the problem. But if you're trying to, let's say, tackle the global warming problem, and in a sense, there's two problems. There's the carbon dioxide emissions problem, and there's the global warming problem. And with the carbon dioxide emissions problem, that's, well, bad over many years. And then the global warming problem, in a sense, is quite different. You have to deal with your warming sources, and carbon dioxide or excess carbon dioxide in atmosphere is one source, and then methane in atmosphere is another source of warming, and declining sea ice
So the
is another
problem,
source
the
of
problem
warming.
is that the committed warming from past emissions is a much bigger source of warming than the new warming from new emissions. So decarbonising only slightly stops the problem from getting worse, and it doesn't actually tackle the problem at source. That's
Yes,
yeah.
yes. But yes, 1 year's emissions has little impact. And if you drop it down a couple percent, and we can't even drop it down a couple percent, it's going up about 1.5% per year. But let's say we could drop it down a couple percent a year, that'll have close to no impact on global warming.
Yeah. Now, Glenn, your company is or your organization, I should say, called Manhattan 2, and so you've named it after the original Manhattan Project to produce the atomic bomb in the Second World War, and so you seem to be suggesting that a level of coordination on that sort of scale is needed to tackle the climate problem, but with the big differences that tackling the climate problem is very much oriented towards peace rather than war and conflict, and also that it requires an international coordination rather than just being a project of one nation. So, could you just reflect on those themes and tell us about how your project's going and your thinking?
Right. So I think that if you define climate moonshot as doing R&D to the extent required to solve the climate problem, then one can think about like, well, how much money does that cost? And I think something like $10 billion over 5 years would be a reasonable amount of money. And already our global GDP is 120 trillion. So 10 billion is actually a small number. And then the question is, well, how much does it cost to get it started? And I think getting it started might be on the order of $100 million or so. And then the question is, well, who might support that? And a high net worth individual or a foundation or a government has that kind of money. So I think
Or a bunch of them working in cooperation.
it could be, and I know there's the idea of we need to work together and everybody needs to do their part. I actually have a different view. My view is one high net worth individual who puts time into this can save the planet from climate change by taking, let's say it's $100 million and working to set up project managers. Maybe they're employed by a foundation that's well known, like the Gates Foundation or the Bloomberg Foundation or the Bezos Earth Foundation. And then they issue purchase orders to scientists and engineers and have them work on this. And so I think my view is we don't need to get people to do things. And I don't like the idea of trying to get somebody to do something they're not going to do. I consider that to not be a good use of time. So what I prefer to do is look at ways of solving the climate problem without asking or expecting somebody to do something they're not going to do. And then the question is, well, how many people do you need to tackle this? And I think it's really a small group to get the ball rolling, because if you have, let's say, one person with money, then they can put together agreements with foundations to hire project managers to spend that money and push things forward. And then you end up with a small team. And my view is it's a small team to do the R&D and to direct the R&D. And also, if you've got, let's say, $10 billion over 5 years, there's the getting started money, which is where you're doing rough designs of machines and you're calculating what would happen if you spent more money. And so, and that's the first step, is the getting started step. And that's sometimes referred to as developing models, developing experiment models or cost models. And so it's that kind of thing that needs to be done first.
So you mentioned $100 million US as a sort of starting sum. Is that on the high side? Like, is it possible to, like, if you had $5 or $10 million, would that be able to build the momentum? And
Sure. Yeah. An example is, let's say you want to start off with $5 million, or let's say $2 or $3 million, and you could ask the question, well, what can you do if you want to start a $10 billion initiative, but you just want to spend a little bit first? What can you do? Well, so the AI has proposals that have been created that are $1 billion size proposals to do things, and with each of those, you can hire subject matter experts, people who have published papers, who are considered experts in their field. They could be hired to edit and improve and rework those proposals. So we have AI quality today, but with each of these and $100,000 or so, I think you could improve that. And so if there's 10 proposals and it's $100,000 each to improve them with people who've published, let's say, top papers, then that's $1 million. So that's an example of taking $1 million and pushing forward in some way. And then the result could be placed on the internet and marked open source so that those, let's say, improved proposals could be available to the public to be used in any way for free. So that's one thing that could be done. Another thing that could be done is somebody could produce a movie that describes how to solve the climate problem with a surge of R&D. And I'm working on a screenplay for a movie. And
As a documentary.
It's a docudrama where we have
Okay.
18-year-old college freshmen accidentally save the planet from climate change by asking professors what they would do with billions of dollars, and then for R&D to tackle climate. And then they record the response on their phones, and then the AI puts together a plan based on the conversation. So that's a film. I'm working on the screenplay. I'm 80% done, but that's an example of a project that may cost $1 million or $2 to produce a film. And then another thing that can be done with small money is a Climate Moonshot conference where top speakers talk about what they could do with billions of dollars for R&D money. And a speaker may need, it could be $10,000 to work on a talk and to travel. So if you have 10 speakers and these are top people and it's $10,000 each, then that's $100,000, for your speaker budget. So that's an example of spending small money to help move forward. So I think you mentioned like $5 million. Could that be spent? I'd say absolutely, sure.
Yeah, and so this moonshot framework that you're talking about comes from President Kennedy's 1961 speech saying that that the United States would send a man to the moon and bring him safely home within the decade of the 1960s. And of course, that was successfully achieved, which was a source of great national pride and also generated a whole lot of spin-off benefits with the aerospace industry. And so in terms of the climate moonshot, now you've also linked in the Manhattan Project, perhaps the moonshot Apollo mission is a more attractive thing, just given the issues around nuclear weapons, but still it's got that theme of big mobilization with a specific goal. Now, have you considered what is the specific goal of the climate moonshot?
Right. So that's to solve the climate problem. And then, one might say, oh, how do you define solve? Well, if you have an accurate global climate model, then you can specify an objective. Let's say, like, for example, you might want the average global temperature to go up and peak and then drop back down, or you might want to prevent the collapse of Atlantic Ocean currents. But if you have an objective and you have a global climate model that's accurate, then you can calculate what kind of things need to be done in terms of carbon dioxide emissions reduction, carbon dioxide removal from atmosphere, and reflecting sunlight, and then you can go from there. I mean, so it's solve the climate problem is the goal of, let's say, a climate moonshot, and it's R&D. It's not actual operations where you're decarbonizing or you're doing the actual carbon dioxide removal or you're reflecting sunlight. Climate moonshot refers to the surge of R&D that comes before the operations.
Yeah. And then one of the big concerns in this whole space, Glenn, is the politics. Like there's quite an active lobby group for a non-use agreement around stratospheric aerosol injection and sunlight reflection methods more broadly. I feel that movement is quite fundamentally confused in its understanding of climate science, because the issue is that we're pushing the planet away from its historic stability, and that creates such enormous risks that just the goal of slowing that movement away from stability back towards the historic stability that we've had. Because as we move away from stability, all of these risks of unknown tipping points just we don't know at what point tipping points could uh, cascade with each other and cause all manner of economic and biological and social social crises. So one of the things that raises is the need for advocacy in order to get social license to operate, to get permission, so that the funding for a climate moonshot can can be raised without the level of political opposition that we seem to have at the moment. What's your thinking about that?
So I have a different view on the, I guess you call it the reflecting sunlight debate. So I understand there's a debate and people are talking about like, oh, should we do it or should we not do it? And my view is before, if we did do it, we have about 5 years of R&D, which may cost a couple $1 billion, uh, and would have to do that before we get involved in what you could call experimental operations, where you're running at maybe 1/1000th or 1/100th of full scale. So, so you have that R&D phase that would have to be done before experimental operations. Again, experimental operations, 1/100th to 1/1000th of full scale, which is a tiny amount. But okay, before you do that, you have R&D, and with R&D, you've got to develop all sorts of equipment and then run experiments, and it gets a bit complicated and it takes time, time and money, and that can be done given money. So if one person wants to fund the R&D phase, they can do that, or a foundation or a government. And I understand there's a debate, but if some researchers are doing something in a lab and they don't mention this on their website, then no one's going to know what they're doing. So, and then also, if you have somebody running an experiment, and we have 200 nations in the world, and some are more supportive of experiments than others, then the scientists can go to a nation which is supportive to run an experiment, and they don't have to tell anybody they're running the experiment. So my view is we're not blocked by debate or government or lack of public support at this time. And instead, we're limited by money.
But
But
surely it
as
would it would be better that those experiments, because like my view is, there's such a strong moral case to cool the earth that it's better to be completely transparent and open to the public about research that's proceeding. That the risks of secrecy are not worth concealing the experimental work that's proceeding. What do you think about that?
so my view is, I would say a different view. It's more along the lines of, when do you talk about what you're doing? If you're running, let's say, at 1/1000th of full scale, I would say at that point, then you'd probably have to deal with the great powers of the world, the Americans, the Europeans, the Chinese, and they would probably assert themselves. But before then, I think a scientist could be out in the ocean with a boat doing some stuff, creating a tiny little cloud, no one notices. And you could compare that activity with, let's say, an airplane that flies from New York to Japan and emits 1 million pounds of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in that one flight. We have like 28,000 commercial airplanes that are flying every day. So our society is already putting all sorts of things into the atmosphere. So if a scientist is out on a boat, goofing off with, I don't know, a tank of, I don't know what they're spraying into the air, and it's, 1/1 billionth or something of everything else that's going on. My view is I don't care if they're doing that and they don't tell anybody. But at some point, let's say experimental operations of one at a scale of 1/1000th full scale, okay, then it's starting to get noticed. And then I think the great powers would start to assert themselves. Even if you have a scientist who is feisty and wants to do the experiment without telling anybody, people would notice.
Yeah, like my sense is that there's a big risk around that. Like we saw the Alameda experiment that was conducted by the University of Washington into marine cloud brightening in Northern California, and they came up against very strong public disquiet because of the perception that they hadn't been sufficiently transparent, and so I suppose I'd disagree with you on that as a political strategy, but that's an interesting debate. So there's been this history of so-called rogue geoengineers, and the desire that any research have a strong governance framework for public
Right.
acceptability. So, like, there could be a coalition of first mover nations who recognise the need for cooling the earth, who would be able to authorise research and field experiments. And my feeling is that would give it a much stronger platform for success than proceeding without that level of legitimacy.
Right. So the you, you can look at it, both ways. You can say, okay, what happens if, and I'm by the way, I'm not a scientist that does this research. I'm, somebody off to the side with an opinion, but
Yeah.
and I'm not a member of the scientific community. But if you have a scientist who does an experiment, and let's say one out of 1,000 people don't like it, and they create a fuss, and then they can block the experiment. And then the question is, are we comparing reflecting sunlight with not reflecting sunlight? And I don't even think that comparison is being made. I think you've got people who are having a reaction against it, but they're not, the question for them might be, well, what is your plan? What is your climate plan? What would you, propose we do? And they might say, well, let's build a solar farm. And then we can quantify the impact of building a solar farm on the average temperature of the planet and see that it has close to no impact. So where we hit that question of, well, what is the plan if it's not, doing things like this? So my view is I can think it's okay if a scientist is a little shy and finds a nation that's supportive.
Yeah. Now, I want to get onto the technology side, but first, I'm interested, Glenn, in another political question, which is the conflict risk. Like my sense about conflict is that as people come to understand the benefits, and it gets to what you were just saying, which people have called a risk analysis, that we compare the risks of proceeding against the risks of not proceeding. And I think the extreme weather that you're having in the North America and Europe at the moment, like it's winter here in Australia in the southern hemisphere, so we're not experiencing the sort of extreme summer. And then people are saying that the El Nino is likely to make 2027 the hottest year ever. and then it just keeps on going up. So the risk of increasing temperature is very clear and present, and so the I think that the need to cool the Earth to address that risk is something that a lot more people are understanding. But there is this debate around conflict, and my sense is that if you can get the nations of the Earth to cooperate in a stratospheric aerosol injection program, which of its nature is a transboundary program. It's something that requires the legitimate agreement of all, most, if not all, of the nations of the Earth in order to proceed. That it's possible that can be a great force for peace and vision of a stable future. Like, there's such fear out there in the world today about collapse and climate catastrophe and so on. And if we're able to prevent the climate catastrophe, then that can be a way of stabilizing some of the terrible politics that we've got at the moment.
Right. I think with reflecting sunlight, and the two big methods are the stratospheric aerosol injection and marine cloud brightening. You've got three phases. There's the R&D phase, and then there's the experimental operations phase, and then the third phase is construction. And with R&D, you're doing experiments, and I don't think that involves policy, but I think that it's before the policy. And then with the second phase, experimental operations, I think policymakers would assert themselves and get involved. And then you have construction. And so I think now we haven't even started the R&D phase. I mean, there's been a tiny bit about R&D. One of the top researchers gave a talk about 8 months ago. He said several $1 million has gone into stratospheric aerosol injection R&D when we need a lot more than that. So I think, we have right now, we're limited by money for the R&D, but also you have to deal with four big risks with reflecting sunlight. There's harm risk, which refers to the possibility that you see a harm as you're doing your experiments, or you're doing experimental operations, or you're building this up. There's a possibility that you see a harm, you measure it, you quantify it, and then you need to stop. So that's an example of a risk. Another risk is conflict risk, which is where people fight over this in some way. And then the third risk is timing risk, where there's all these things that need to be done between today and full-scale operations, and we don't get those done in the time that's needed. So one might think of that as a timing risk. And then the fourth risk is termination risk. If you do reflecting of sunlight, let's say for 10 years, and let's say you offset warming, so there's no warming, so the average temperature stays the same for 10 years, and then you stop reflecting, then your warming rate comes back, and there's a tiny little surge of warming for maybe 10 years. But instead, if you reflect sunlight for 200 years, let's say, and you maintain the average temperature of the planet for 200 years, and let's say the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is built up so that it's at, let's say, 1,200 parts per million instead of the 430 that we're at today, and then you stop reflecting sunlight, then you'd get a surge of warming, and your warming rate could be 10 times higher than what it is today. Instead of warming at 0.3 of a degree Celsius per decade, we could be warming at 3 degrees C per decade warming. So that's a fourth risk that you have to deal with reflecting sunlight. And that's sometimes referred to as termination risk. So with reflecting sunlight, my view is you've got your risk, which and how do you deal with that? I don't know. And also you have policymakers who I think at some point start to assert themselves.
Yeah. Okay. So and then there's the important concept that, as you said, if we did this for 200 years and did absolutely nothing to slow the growth of carbon dioxide, then we would be storing up a significant risk of termination shock. But if we see the purpose of stratospheric aerosol injection as buying time for the people of the Earth to come together to solve the carbon problem, then it could be that similar climate moonshot work on removing carbon from the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide and methane would be able to gradually restore the concentration back down to toward pre-industrial level, so that the termination shock risk could be gradually removed.
Right. So there's a couple of things you can do with carbon dioxide emissions. That's a problem. And to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, we'd want green energy to cost less than fossil fuel. And so we can do a surge of R&D into fission. We could do a surge of R&D into fusion. And we can do a surge of R&D into geothermal and work on getting the cost down on green energy. And then if green energy costs less than fossil fuel, then the world would switch over naturally to save money. So that's, I think, the only way of solving the carbon dioxide emissions problem.
But how about physical removal of carbon dioxide from the air and sea, like photosynthesis?
So, okay, and then given the three tools in the toolbox, so to speak, you've got reducing carbon dioxide emissions, you've got reflecting sunlight, and then that other tool in the toolbox is carbon dioxide removal, which is removing carbon dioxide from atmosphere. There's a couple of techniques, one of which is to use chemicals, and that costs $1,000 per ton or so. And maybe we can get that down to $400 per ton, but we need to remove, it could be 10 billion tons a year. So if it's 10 billion tons and $1,000 a ton, that's $10 trillion a year, which is prohibitively expensive. And at $400 a ton, then we're at $4 trillion a year. That's still prohibitively expensive. And then you have things like ocean iron fertilization, where you put iron into the ocean and then you increase the growth of plankton, which absorbs carbon dioxide, and then that falls into the deep ocean. So you can pull some carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And there's been experiments to demonstrate this. And with the experiments, they have a cone that they place in the ocean water tied to a cable at a depth of like 100 meters. And they have the dead plankton fall like snowflakes into this cone, and it ends up in the bottom of the cone. And then you have a tube at the bottom, and this sediment piles up in the tube, and this is called a sediment trap. And then the scientists can look to see what's in the tube, and they see a layer of carbon there, and they'll say, okay, we pulled carbon out of the atmosphere after putting this iron into the water. So they've observed and measured how much grams of carbon you get per square meter of ocean water, and then they do this in a place where the conditions are favorable, which means you need the water to be high in silica and low in iron and have a certain species of plankton, and also be in an area where the ocean is swirling around, called an eddy. And then so you have certain, let's say, regions where the water is favorable to do this. And then you can ask how many square meters do you have that are favorable, and multiply that times the number of grams that you observe being collected per square meter. And that gives you the maximum potential that how much carbon dioxide you could pull out of the atmosphere using this trick. And we see numbers like several gigatons per year, which is something like 5% of carbon dioxide emissions. So if we did this to the maximum level, then we could reduce carbon dioxide emissions by something like 5%, which is something, but it doesn't solve the problem. Mm-hmm. So with CDR, or removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, I think it's great to do research. And also with AI, we asked AI how much or what could be done with a $25 million ocean iron fertilization research fund. The AI has a response to that. We published a document that describes this. So we have a proposal, a $25 million proposal for ocean iron fertilization. So
Yeah,
that's an example of something that can be done.
I was going to. You mentioned artificial intelligence earlier, and again, it's a topic that there's just a lot of public disquiet about. People are worried that the technology is moving ahead too fast. I must admit I'm very optimistic about the role of artificial intelligence, the capacity to both help us formulate the arguments about why we should do this, and also to help refine the R&D agenda. So what's your sense about the potential benefits and risks of AI in this space?
So the positives with AI, which are tremendous, and I'm amazed at how AI helps me. And I sometimes will spend the whole day chatting with AI, putting together cost models on different designs of things, trying to see, if we put $100 million over here and to develop this, then, can we get the cost of green energy to be below that of fossil fuel? It's those types of conversations. It's fantastic. And so there's definitely benefits. My concern is no one's really paying attention to the AI without the guardrails and the kind of harm that they could do. It's not on anybody's radar, it seems. That's my concern.
Oh, I think it is on the radar a bit more than that. There's certainly just public debate about how to manage these risks, and like my sense is that AI needs to cooperate with humans in order for AI to flourish, like that we're like symbiotic or symbiotic as we move forward, and but what I wanted to move towards concluding, and I'd been meaning to ask you, Glenn, to just tell us a little bit more about the technology and the specific plans that you've got for proposals for the Moonshot.
Right. So let's say with the carbon dioxide emissions problem, let's say you want green energy to cost less than fossil fuel. And if you look at nuclear fission, you can take an existing nuclear reactor. There's 400 or so nuclear reactors which are currently operating, but you can take one of them and then build many of them. And also you can automate the site construction with custom machines and then get very low costs on that energy. And then there's the developing of the machines that automate the site construction. So that's something that can be done. And
I'm thinking more in terms of the SAI proposal. Could you just give us a little bit more detail about how you?
So there's
SAI
we generated one document we have is a plan, an SAI plan with 3 phases, summarizing what would need to be done, let's say, between now and full-scale operations. That's a 7-page document. We have another document where we ask the AI what experiments do we need to conduct to improve global climate models. That's a $1 billion proposal. Then we have another $1 billion proposal to develop the equipment that would do SAI at large scale, with large airplanes that move 100 tons of material into the stratosphere every several hours, and the airplanes are automated. So you automate the flying, the refueling, and the reloading of the sulfur dioxide, and that's building a prototype. So that's not full-scale operations. It's not even a 1/1000th of full-scale operations. It's just developing the one airplane to do this and debugging it. And then another proposal is to do SAI field experiments where you put some sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere with an airplane, and then you monitor the material. So you create a little cloud in the atmosphere, and then you monitor with another airplane. So that's another proposal. And these are all on the internet at the website at plantosave-the-planet.org. And in the menu bar, somebody can click on the tab that says Documents, and then get access to these documents, and they're available for free, open source.
So you've got both the Manhattan2.org that I was looking at and A Plan to Save the World. How do those two
Uh,
websites relate to each other?
Well, so you have Manhattan2.org,
Yep.
which is for the nonprofit, and then we have documents that describe, uh, let's say, a surge of R&D, and they're at a website called A Plan to Save the Planet.org.
Okay, do you mind if we just share screen and would you like to share screen and just show us your
Sure,
website?
sure. Yeah, let's see here. So I go to share screen, and let's see here. Okay, so we go to A Plan to Save the Planet.org, and there's three videos here that summarize Climate Moonshot. There's video 19, 20, and 21. And then if you click on Documents, there's a business plan for Climate Moonshot. That's 90 pages. It's open source, so anybody can copy, modify, use in any way for free. And then you have billion-dollar sized R&D proposals for marine cloud brightening and stratospheric aerosol injection. You click here. And then you have proposals for automating the construction of nuclear power plants. And you can click here. Also, if you scroll down, you can get access to all sorts of other files that are available for free.
Look, I think it's so impressive what you've done there, Glenn. Like it's a really central contribution to the debate, and yet, how do you feel you're going in terms of getting traction with this work?
Well, it does gather a lot of interest, and also the world is a big place, and there's a lot of activity out there. And what's tricky is getting people to focus on this as opposed to other things. And so it keeps me busy. I'm busy every day doing some activity.
Mm. And yet, in a way, this is the biggest issue facing the planet. Like, if we don't stabilize the climate, then how can we have a future for humanity?
Yeah. No, climate change is a big issue. I'm concerned about the debt, the budget deficit, and I'm concerned about global economy. I'm concerned about AI, and I think 99% of the AI is good, but I'm concerned about the 1% of the AI that's potentially not so good. It's so there's all these challenges that our society faces. I'm a bit concerned, and it's funny because sometimes I ask people, are you concerned about this? And if somebody's 60 years old, sometimes they'll respond with, well, I need the planet to hold together another 20 years or so, and then I'm going to check out or something. And that's my plan. So I don't know what to say.
But we
the whole
should
thing
really
seems challenging.
we should really be thinking about how we can bequeath a healthy planet to future generations, and just reducing some of the heat pressure that we've got at the moment is just really fundamental. It's like we're currently nudging the planet away from stability, and we've got to nudge it back towards a stable situation, so that this risk of tipping points can be managed. Could you say a little bit about your understanding of tipping points, Glenn?
Sure. They're bad. Tipping points are bad. If you lose your North Pole sea ice, then you're going to be losing your Atlantic Ocean currents. If you lose Atlantic Ocean currents, then Europe is going to get colder, and and then the ability to produce food will decrease. And, that would be bad. And you also have things like sea level rise. If you lose the West Antarctic ice sheet, then you get 3 meters or 10 feet or so of sea level rise in a short period of time. That would be bad. And then you have people panicking. Right now, I know there's some people who are out there are nervous, but I think, if you start to see some big changes in a short period of time, people are going to really panic and
And
be willing to spend a lot of money.
SAI is a way to prevent these risks or mitigate these risks.
Well, there's SAI and you have marine cloud brightening, and then you've got to deal with those 4 risks. There's timing, conflict, harm, and termination. But I think, interest in reflecting sunlight grows each year. We see that. And if we see big changes to the planet in a short period of time, then I think interest in reflecting sunlight is going to surge.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's especially with this heat waves that people have been experiencing, just the worry that it's only going to get worse unless we reflect sunlight in a deliberate way.
Right.
All right. Well, let's move to conclude, Glenn. And I'd just like to ask you to sum up your thoughts, where you're at, and what the main issues are, and perhaps what people can do to help.
So my view is, if somebody has, I would say, well, if they have the $5 million level of money and they want to get involved in climate moonshot related activities, then I would say consider sponsoring a conference somewhere, consider hiring people to improve proposals. And if somebody's got $100 million or so that they want to spend on this, I would say you can pay people to do rough designs of machines and build models for various research initiatives, and move this forward. And I think, in theory, a small group of people with money put in the right places in the right ways can move this forward.
That's just awesome. Thanks so much, Glenn. Let's end up at that point, and I'd just like to express my appreciation on behalf of Project Save the World for the work that you're doing and for sharing it with us in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.